Welcome to Wisdom Woman podcast. I believe that is in constant change and growth, not in perfection, that we find happiness. In this podcast, I'm going to be talking with top performance professionals about tools, techniques, new ideas on how to develop your communication skills, use your creative thinking, be a team player, manage your tasks like a pro, be motivated, become an expert on relationships, and a problem solver. Everything you need to be 5 stars in all areas of your life. My intention is to help you develop your skills and find balance between your professional and personal life. My name is Bettina Meyer-Fluke, and I hope I can be your trusted advisor. With 5 generations working together in today's organizations, it's more important than ever for everyone to understand the generational difference that sets them apart. After all, in most cases, you don't choose who you work with. Workers from different generations bring different expectations and life experiences to the workplace. This can be particularly challenging for managers attempting to lead teams comprised of workers from different generations. It's not about getting the most out of your employees. It's about ensuring everyone has a satisfying work environment and a work experience as well. The tips you're going to learn today can help you not only on your work environment, but also in your family relationships. This episode intends to help people get along well. We invite to our podcast an HR specialist called Amanda Erickson. She graduated from CU Boulder with her bachelor's. Amanda has worked in the human resource field for nearly 2 decades. She began her career in recruiting and talent acquisition. She continued her career predominantly working in consulting roles, working to support HR in various companies. Her primary focus has been on compliance and strategy. She has worked in multiple industries in both the private and the public sector. Amanda is one of the founding partners of HRX, that we're going to talk a little bit at the end of this episode. Amanda has presented at many conferences and workshops focusing on HR best practices and strategy, and that's how I met her in a special event for females here in Northern Colorado. In addition, she has testified at the state capitol and has lobbies on HR issues at both state and national levels. Our challenge today is to teach you how to navigate the multi-generational workforce. So welcome, Amanda, to Wisdom Woman Podcast.
Thank you, Bettina. I appreciate being here, and it was lovely meeting you. That's right. It was I think it was the Northern Colorado Women's Summit, and it was a nice event. There was a lot of attendees, and it was great. It was wonderful to meet new friends, see old friends, colleagues that we've been connecting with for some years. So it was a nice event. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this event was amazing. We had around, I think, 300 female entrepreneurs. And Amanda was talking about different generations that really, really impressed me, her perspective. I love how do you started your presentation talking about different perspectives, the bird story. You have to tell again the bird story. Please tell us. It was incredible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, it's one of those visuals that you can really see in your mind, no matter what, and no matter where you are. And that visual is, imagine that there are 3 birds on a wire. And when you're coming to talk with people about something that's new or maybe different, or you're learning new things, the important thing is that we're all coming with our own experiences, and that shapes our perspective. And for that reason, I start with the birds on a wire. And if you vision those 3 birds on a wire, and then I ask the audience, which we talked about, is tell me, if I were to hit that far right bird with a ball, how many birds would I continue to have on the wire? And Bettina, I don't know if you remember, but we had varying answers, right? We had people that said, I would have 2 birds left on the wire, or I would have one bird left on the wire, or I'd have 0 birds left on the wire. And you ask them their reasoning for why they believe that is the answer. And for some, it was with only one. Well, I hit the one, right? Some said even we still had 3 birds on the wire because I missed totally, right? So what I find interesting is it doesn't really matter what the answer is. There's not a correct answer. I mean, there definitely is. I would say there are 0 birds on the wire. So we would say that's the right answer. I'm just kidding. Really, what it comes down to is every person has their own perspective. And so when we're talking about things that bring perspective into the conversation, which generational workforce definitely does, it's really important to keep that in mind, that it doesn't mean that I'm right and you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong. It's just a combination of experiences that brought us into that room together, and understanding from the beginning that we're all going to have different perspectives, which may lead to a really interesting conversation. So that was the whole point of the bird on the wire exercise, is to get people in that framework. So hopefully our audiences as well.
Yeah, I think it opened our minds that everybody can think differently and we can have the same purpose. For example, everybody were there really to learn from you, but we had different perspectives, how to deal with that and how to add value to each other, isn't it?
It is. I think it's a great advantage actually to think that people are coming with different experiences, predominantly from both the side of trying to be inclusive in the workforce, which has been a huge driver for most organizations over the last couple of years in particular, especially here in the States, which is a good thing, but also because from our customer base, it matters that we are thinking of different perspectives, because it's likely your customer base will change, has changed, is changing, and you need to have some clarity with that when you're looking at hiring people, bringing people into your workforce, that different perspectives is only going to be advantageous for all organizations and their bottom lines going forward.
Yeah, you mentioned something about change. And I think what you mentioned at that conference was the longevity is changing. A lot of people are living longer than they used to, and this is impacting the workforce. What is your perspective on this topic?
Yes. So it is, it is an interesting stat. We actually learned from SHRM, which is the acronym for Society of Human Resource Management. They do a lot of research on some of these things. And one of the things that they discussed was this idea of velocity of change. And it basically starts with big times in our history that has had significant, usually development or engineering or some type of something that maybe has propelled us forward as people. So the first one was when the steam engine was invented. That increased our life expectancy because we now had a different means of traveling and seeing, other areas of the country, for example, here in the United States. When the electricity or telephone was invented, again, our life expectancy increased. When television was invented, and then when mobile and internet was invented, again, same pattern, that our life expectancy increased. So as we're growing in things like artificial intelligence, and that is now starting to move into even healthcare, where we have, nanobots and that can be put into our bodies to help us live longer and be healthier for longer periods of time. They are predicting that by 2050, so 2050, the average life expectancy is going to be 90 years old. In fact, they shared that right now, today, the person who will live to be 150 has been born. That's crazy talk. And so when you're thinking about that in the organization, where normally your retirement age may be somewhere between 60 and 65, 67, maybe pushing into 70, we're now saying that if our average life expectancy is 90 and we have people who are living to 150, then it is very possible that some of the baby boomer or traditional generations, as they're called, which have maybe even exited the workforce, may be coming back to us. So, as professionals that are trying to figure out how to connect that group, to have inclusion in that group, to get the best out of our workforce, we have to understand how we're training people who are interested in strictly online short snippet trainings of 2 minutes long. I want to communicate in 90 characters or less. And then you have those that are used to 200-page manuals and having step-by-step instructions laid out for them and being told, this is what we expect from you, now go do it, and we'll see you a week from now and have it done. That's very different and very hard to really manage as a manager. So part of what we're really focusing on is how do we train people on how to be inclusive and open-minded and thinking about how people learn, how people grow in order to get the most out of that person and make sure that experience is good. And I think that that's really important. The other thing that we noted in that research is something that we've probably seen across the board here, which is that one, earlier on, my parents' generation, I happen to be a 1980s product child. And so my parents' generation, it was very much about you went into your career, you stayed in your career, you moved up through longevity in your career and having been there, and you were rewarded for tenure. And both of my parents received pensions, which is just something that doesn't very much exist anymore, at least in the United States. So when we're working through that, we're now seeing that people not only have 6 or 7 positions in maybe their career path, we are starting to see the younger generations wanting instead to work in different careers entirely. So they may have anywhere between 3 to 7 careers in their lifetime. So not only are we now trying to have this idea of change and people working longer, but we have this idea that people may not be working for us as long as they once were. And so that means that not only do we need to be effective, but we need to be efficient in how we train and work with people in our organizations, because we can't spend a long time trying to get them up to speed any longer. We just don't have that luxury. And so it's a real challenge for those folks out there right now.
Yeah, what I like that you said about this topic is that we need to be open-minded. If there is a possibility for you to go back to the workforce, not retire anymore, and if you're having difficulties, for example, to adapt to the new generation, it's important to open your mind and understand that this can be valuable and you can be back in the workforce. Or you can be in the workforce longer. So you have to learn how to adapt to those different generations inside your work environment, isn't it?
So I think that there is something to be said about that. I think it is an interesting dynamic because we are now in this strange world where potentially people may be working for managers that are the same age as their children. That's a very interesting dynamic, right? My boss is the same age as my child, who I raised and taught everything that they know in the world. That can be very uncomfortable. It can also be very freeing. So I think that there is this idea of being open-minded. And I know in our organization, for example, we do hire mature workers. We hire people who maybe this is a change in career for them. And I'll tell you what, their work ethic and what they bring to the table and their concern for doing good work is important. And that is a generational value that they bring and we value as well. Now, on the other hand, younger, new emerging professionals that are coming into the workforce, they've grown up with technology in a way that our more mature workforce hasn't experienced. And I think that brings them ahead in a different measure. And then what you need to do as an organization is be open-minded to thinking, maybe we have some cross mentorship that can happen here. Maybe we can have somebody help somebody else with technology and understanding how to use the new tools and getting immersed in that really quickly at the same time that they're sharing with them, work ethic and what a good product looks like, and, sticking it out and staying with an organization for a period of time. And I think that that's a really positive thing that can happen in organizations. I think, again, the challenge is more with that management leadership team and really finding that right blend of people who can help inspire those things. And that may be its full-time job all by itself. So I see leaders working more in helping the dynamics of the workforce work together to get the best and most out of them, more than I see them really being individual contributors themselves. So I think it's going to be a really niche area and a focus that we have to be considering in order to make sure that we're getting the best talent.
And how many generations do you think we have working together nowadays when you talk about mixing?
Yeah, I think we have 5. I mean, we really do. We've got kind of the traditionalists. Those are the folks who've been around. I guess they kind of look at that number around 1925 to 1945 birth rates. So these are your folks who have been kind of through the Great Depression. They really stayed their money, put it in the mattress. They're the folks who are like, we don't buy something unless we can pay for it fully. And I know that, for example, my partner's his grandmother is 100, and every time, and they still have weekly conversations together. And every time he talks about, we're going to buy a new car, we're going to do something, she's like, do you have all that money saved up? And that's just not how we do it anymore, right? Like it's difficult to purchase a full vehicle all by yourself without having to do some finance. But that was really the mindset of that generation of people. And then you have your baby boomers who kind of came in, post-war era, that 1945 into 1965 timeline, I think it was. And then we have our Generation Xers, who really are the folks that kind of came in, really were it's an interesting dynamic because they came in, they were the ones that really went to college, and being college, that was an important piece of that's what you did. You went to your, and got your bachelor's degree. And as long as you had a degree, it didn't matter, you would get a better job. And then you started to see that end of Generation X where the internet came in, and we started to see people being successful without necessarily having to have that college degree. And then we started to see that millennial generation coming in, and they experienced the Great Recession. They were graduating around that time. They saw 9/11 here in the United States. That was impactful. And I think for them, that became a thing where it was, why would I want to do the same thing and stay with the same company if it's possible that things get tough and they just lay me off because I make the most in the organization? And they saw a lot of that with their parents and that Generation X generation in the workforce during the recession. So I think that you have this new group that's coming out and saying, I want to value what I'm doing. I want to be interested in it. There's this sense of community that is really important. And I think that that's what we're seeing with really that millennial generation, which happens to be our biggest population coming into the workforce now. And then last but not least, we've got our Zers. I'm raising a Generation Zer. I think maybe Bettina, you know what that's like,
yes.
Right? So we've got our Zers who are really entrepreneurial in the way that they're looking at things. And they're saying, well, what if I forge my own path? And that's a whole new mindset that's coming in. And we're seeing kind of this mix of like that traditional baby boomer, Generation X, millennial, like all coming together, I think, because we're understanding it more and we're talking about it with that generation. We're saying, you need to be thinking about work, and we're talking about those things much earlier. We have organizations that are dipping into elementary schools, middle schools, helping people get, trained and certified. I think my son is Serve Safe certified through his school because he had a cooking class, right? And so there is this idea of really trying to have more of what we've seen with more, I want to say apprenticeships, but that may be not the right word, but what we're seeing in the European world, where we have people who are learning a trade, learning a craft, and that is actually becoming something that we're really honing in on, and not saying that not everybody has to go and get a degree in order to be successful, in order to support your family and have a good career path. So I think it's just a very interesting mix and melting pot of people that we have in the workplace now. And if you're lucky, you maybe have a little bit of all of that in your workplace.
Yeah, I think it would be nice if you can share some topics. Let's talk about what was the aspiration of each generation. Do you have an idea?
Sure.
So the aspiration for the traditionalists was to have their own home, wasn't it? And then
I think that's true. I do think that's true. I mean, most of the research that we have is from Pew Research Center and Mercer and some of those really nice organizations, and happy to share that as well, Bettina. I don't know if that's something that you can include in a link or something with the podcast, but that would be helpful. And yes, I think that for the most part, they really wanted to have that something of theirs. They wanted to be able to own something, to be able to move along. And then I think that you had that baby boomer generation that came in and life was good, things were happening, everything was great. And again, they were still moving at the top of the workforce and really understood the idea of like going in and what I say, making the donuts, right? It was
their aspiration was like a job security, I think, for the boomers.
That's exactly right. Like you just went in, you made the donuts. You made the donuts. There's a commercial, I think, with like Winchell's or Dunkin' Donuts or something where it goes in and every day it's like, I make the donuts, I make the donuts. And that's kind of what it was for that generation. But there was this idea that if you put in the work, you get there, you move forward. And they also had a lot of different things that shaped them. They experienced the Vietnam War, civil rights movement. We saw a lot of laws, at least in the United States here, that impact even us today and what we look at and work through in HR all the time. And then, that Generation X, we see a lot of continuing into that, a lot of new laws coming into play. Certainly, we're seeing a lot of those still happening in today's era. But that group was really dominated by just wanting to make sure that they could continue their professional work, making sure that they were able to grow in their profession. And that's been something that we've seen a lot of because they had a lot of baby boomers in the generation who then retired. And now we have a lot of millennials coming up in that generation. So then we have this Generation X that's like, well, when am I leading? Where am I the manager? When do I get to be the CEO? And I think that that's an interesting dynamic for them right now as well.
And also the Generation X was really into work-life balance. I think the millennials are more into freedom and flexibility, and the Generation Z, security and stability back again.
I would think that's exactly right. I think also what's interesting about that term with and probably why, and I happen to fall right in, depending on which study you look at, that Generation X/millennial group, where we like to call ourselves the Zennials because we're not quite one or the other. But when it comes down to it, I think that for us, that Generation X, the work-life balance has definitely been a key part of it. But you have to think that we went to school when I was in, grade school and high school. I took notes with a pen and pencil, right? And on note paper. By the time I went to college, we had the internet. And I was doing everything on the computer, and we had high speed internet, when I was in college. It was a very different. And I think because of that, we're looking at saying, I no longer work just 8 to 5 like my parents did. I'm working kind of all the time. So we want this work-life balance. It's a hard phrase though, because balance to me is like a balance beam. And then any moment I might fall and squash my career or might fall and squash my family. And having this real understanding of it's more of a harmony or an integration is really important, because balance is really difficult to find right now. Especially after what's happened over the last couple of years worldwide with the pandemic. It's been incredibly difficult. And I think that we're lucky and unlucky in some ways that we have this immediate technology where we can be online and we can be at our homes and still working and doing that. And I think there's something really great about that, and also really difficult because it's hard to turn it off. And I think that previous generations had a little more, they had a little less of that technology piece that had increased it, that they had a little bit more, I do my job, I come home and I'm at home. I do my job, come home and I'm at home. And we're seeing a little bit less of that. And I think that that's where our millennials are interested in freedom. And I'm cool with working a bunch of hours as long as I can do it from a beach in Fiji, right? Or somewhere else, I'm good with that. And I think you're seeing your Generation Zs are saying, I want to like life. I want to like what I do. I want to believe in what I do. I want to work and I'm interested and excited about working, but maybe I want to work for myself and I'm going to figure out how to structure that in a smart way. And that's where I'm saying I feel like we're starting to kind of see the collective all come down into that generation as well.
I totally agree. And let's talk a little bit about the attitude towards technology from those different generations. You mentioned that Generation X was really exposed to technology. But how about the traditionalists? They're really largely disengaged, don't you think, with technology? But they have so much to bring to the table as well if they open, I don't know, themselves to learn with the young. Yeah.
They do. It's interesting. Again, the traditionalists in particular, if you have some of those working in your organization, I think that's wonderful. And I think that what they bring to the table is some of that legacy information. But if you're not careful, they can get into well, this is how we used to do it. Maybe that's not how we do it anymore. However, there might be some really, really great information there. Because one of the things that I think the traditionalists are about is that handwritten note. I can't tell you how many of our clients, especially when we first started, I would write a handwritten note to them, thanking them for their time and doing that. And that meant something because that's just not what you see anymore. And I think that having that personal touch, that conversation, that taking a minute to have a cup of coffee and not multitask people is really important. And I think that we struggle with that. Because we have so many things we can do and technology makes it so easy for us to do all of those things. I mean, I have like 8 ways that people can connect with me right now, like email, chat, message, SMS, and I can't tell you how many times a project management system and tools, I'll have somebody say, well, didn't you see that? Or aren't you? And I'm like, I just didn't. And so I try really hard when I am on something with somebody to be present and participating as much as possible. It's really hard to do. And I think that that's that traditionalist value that comes in where it's like, take a minute, listen to the story, listen to understand rather than respond. And I think that that matters. It matters and it brings that level of relationship to a different area than it could if you didn't have that time and you take a minute. So I think that there's something really important to be said there. I was raised by a boomer and my mom still likes to give me advice every day. Doesn't matter that I'm a 40-year-old woman at the same time. She still wants to give me my advice. And I think that there is something about that with baby boomers is that they do have a lot of knowledge and experience and they want to share that. And I think that that's important. But I also think that making sure that we're also reminding that there are new changes and new shifts that are happening is equally important conversation to have on the other side. So ultimately, when we're looking at all the different generations and we're looking at what they grew up with, what's familiar to them, what is super uncomfortable to them, if we listen and we try to help with those things and we work together, at the end of the day, most of the time, people are always still wanting the same things. I want to be heard. I want to be cared for. I want to have some love in my life. I want to be respected. I want to be able to share my thoughts when I want to do that. And ultimately, if we're all working for the same company, we kind of want it to be successful so that we can also have the other things that we need: shelter, comfort, food, those types of things that are just there for every person on the planet. So how we get there, again, I think is going to be a management challenge and a leadership challenge. And that's where I think that we need to train managers and leaders efficiently and effectively in order to make sure they can help us work through things. But overall, just remind that people are people, right? We all kind of want the same things. We may just want to get it a different way. But truly, if we can just take a minute, I think everybody wants to have those same desires met.
I agree with you. And what do you think about, how to take the best out of it? Because the Generation X, they were digital immigrants. They learn as they go. The millennials, they are digital natives. They were born with that. And the Generation Z, they're totally dependent on technology. They cannot attend to a meeting without a smartphone. They feel lost without it. How can they learn from each other how to take the best out of it in regards to technology?
Yes. When it comes down to it, I think that it just becomes you have to have a safe environment where people are able to make mistakes. And the reason that I say that is because it's really important. Because, yes, somebody may really gravitate toward understanding, and I'll just use our company as an example. We do HR consulting. HR, human resources, the work that we do is difficult. It is hard. So even if we have a project management tool that someone who's been born into technology can pick up and understand effectively and efficiently and do it really quickly, it doesn't mean that they understand people. And on our team, we have younger professionals who come in and have a really good grasp on tools and technology and can get that going really quickly. And then we have a more mature workforce on our team as well, who actually understand what it's like to work with people. They understand what it means to have those conversations. And so we try to spread it around a little bit. We do a lot of training as an organization. We make sure that we sit down. And more importantly, we have processes that catches mistakes as they happen, because we expect that people aren't going to be perfect. But their nuances of what they understand and don't understand are very different. So I might have a young professional who understands how to use Word or Excel or project management software really quickly, but because they've operated in 90 characters or less, or whatever Twitter's allowing now, you'll see a lot of things like, OMGs and oh my words. And I'll ask, what does that acronym mean? In my honest opinion, I didn't know what that one was for a long time. IMHO. And I was like, what does that mean? But unfortunately, labor laws, employee handbooks, policies, the things that we do as a production value in our organization don't work in acronyms. So we have to have other people in our organization that review that work to make sure that it speaks to everyone, right? And so there is some disadvantage with trying to be quick and slick about it. It harms us sometimes when we're trying to make a pointed direction for people that makes sense. And that's not making sure that we have legalese in all of our policies and procedures. We want to be friendly about that. So if I can't share a document with one of my more mature workers and one of my emerging professionals, and they both understand the content, then we're not language friendly enough. And that's important because that's how we need to be able to communicate with our clients. And we need to make sure that their populations will hear that. So I think working together is really important. So intentionally setting up time where you're doing that, where you have people talking to each other, where you create a space of vulnerability where people can open up and talk about those things is really important. Because if you don't have that, then you're going to be stifled. And I think your process of growth is going to be a very difficult one. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and talking about communication preferences, what do you think is more each generation preferred, and how can we make them talk with each other in a more efficient way?
Absolutely. So again, I'm going to take a minute and say, I think that we can always acquiesce to the way someone communicates, but I think that as an organization overall, people just want to know what the guidelines are that they have to operate in. So, for example, we have organization where I think that when you're looking at somebody who's been in the workforce a while, picking up the phone, having an email is okay, but having a conversation is what matters. And there are times that overall we have to encourage some of our emerging professionals that If you've had an email that's gone back and forth 5 times, it's time to pick up the phone because there's clearly not clarification there. Whereas someone in our organization who is a more mature worker likely would have picked up the phone already, because that's just something that's natural to them. Where our younger workers generally prefer text message or chat function, but it just depends. Now, I have my business partner, for example. She is phenomenal. She's one of the best multitaskers I've ever known, and she'll remember everything that was said. I can't do that. So we have to have some clear guidelines as to how that works. But she prefers email. She likes email. That's what she enjoys working in. And she can manage that. I get overwhelmed with a lot of email. And so for me, my team knows that the best way to collaborate with me is in chat, and then to give me a call, because I'm going to get frustrated if we get 10 pages into a chat message, right? Because I prefer to have that personal communication. But I don't know if that's as generational as it once was. I think that, again, we don't want to just have things that CYA or cover your butt, right? We don't want to just say that, oh, well, I had that in email, or, oh, I had that in a policy. At the end of the day, we want to create a space where people can ask questions if they don't understand something. We want to make sure that people know that still that collaboration in whatever way, whether it's a Slack channel, a Teams channel, using technology to do that, or if it's just having a cup of coffee to make sure that you're connecting on something, I think there's still a place for all of that. If I am asynchronously connecting with you, that's because the project allows me to do that. And to me, asynchronous is email, communication, that type of thing. Whereas if I'm having a personal conversation, that probably, or I'm reprimanding someone, that probably still needs to be done one-on-one and not in front of everybody. So I don't know if that's as much of a generational need as anything else. But generally, I think you're going to see your younger people prefer text, quick conversations, emojis, that kind of thing. What kind of emoji do I use for this? Is it the smiley face or is it the puff? Right? like, I don't know. But we have emoji etiquette now, right? So when you're thinking about that, I think that's important. But for your older workers, I think they still prefer that kind of old style communication where we're going to have a conversation and get to the point of things quickly in a different way. So I think efficiency and effectiveness are still important. How we get there might have changed a little bit, but yet I still think that you have to determine what kind of conversation you need to have to really elicit what type of appropriate communication makes the most sense.
I think we all go back to the open-minded. For example, for young generations, it's so important for them to open their minds that sometimes a text message won't work. They will need to call the person. I always tell my kids when we do carpool, if the person that's going to pick you up is not answering the text, is because they cannot. You should call to be sure they're going to be there. They have so much difficulty calling someone. So why should I call? It's unpolite call someone.
I know.
You want to talk to someone? Just call it.
I'll be honest, though. My 50-year-old husband feels the same way. He'll be the one that'll say, well, I sent them an email, and it's like, sometimes you need to call. So again, I think that there are these safety nets that we've created in certain spaces where we can be somewhat anonymous behind a screen. Less so when we're in front of someone. Rejection is so much easier to get over text message. Sometimes, I mean, there is some of that, and this is not my area of expertise, but like the cyberbullying and things like that are out there that can be just as horrendous, but I think that hearing no face-to-face, having rejection on some level face-to-face, having to deal with conflict face-to-face is still challenging. And I think it doesn't get easier necessarily if we delay it. So I think that sometimes just having that understanding of when do we do this? And that's where I say at the end of the day, I feel like for your organization, giving people a roadmap, guide rails, what do we expect to follow? In our organization, we have templates that say, hey, here's how we generally greet clients. Here are our greetings. Here's how we refer to clients, because that's our brand. That's who we are. It may not be. And we have this joke where I'm like, it's not appropriate to be like, sup, Bettina. How's it going? Right? Like, that's not appropriate. Instead, we'll say things like, good morning, good afternoon, how are you? But it's not going to be as formal as salutations, greetings, that kind of thing. So for us, I think it depends also on your brand, and who you want to be, and how you interact with your community, whatever that community may look like. And then giving that guidance to your team is really helpful to them, because they don't want to make mistakes if they know what they are, what those guidelines are. I think that's important.
Yeah, you mentioned about using a correction app. I use Grammarly a lot, and I think for young generations, reviewing the text, reviewing emails that they're sending is so important, because they got so used to simplify their language, and it could be helpful, to have a support tool to help them look more like in between all the generations, don't you think?
I do. And I think it goes even beyond that. We found we have some great colleagues that we work with at some universities, and we have found that with the pandemic and people working kind of asynchronously and remote and from home, we've lost some of that interconnection piece. And there are some things that have to be reestablished. Manners, how we show up, being on time. Some of those things have been a little bit lax because it has been just a very strange couple of years. Now, doing that with grace and having some awareness that people may be homeschooling their children still and doing other things, I think is important. But we also want to make sure that we establish what those professional guardrails look like for our team, so that they know what's expected of them. And I think that we lost a little bit of that with some of that transition, with some of the schooling and different things that we still have to help remind people what it's like to be at home and in a personal position and also working professionally. That's difficult. And I think that it has been somewhat of a challenge, but I will say that I think that we're navigating it well, to be honest. I think that we've learned a lot about ourselves. We've embraced a lot through diversity and inclusion. It's been a wild few years for sure.
I just want to close up here with some tips for you that is listening to our podcast. So, how to get along with different generations. First of all, we talked about understanding the different work styles. Second, take values into consideration. Different generations value different things. Share insights as much as you can. Be open-minded to share insights. This will make a huge difference. Value the best of each generation. As you mentioned, the beginning, the X generations have different than the millennials, and everybody can add value if you collaborate. Seek for a common ground. In the company, it's important to have a common ground, how the company wants to communicate, how the company wants to be presented to their clients. This was a huge thing. And learn from each other. That's what we're here for. That we're here to grow as a personal being. So what can we learn from each other? Do you have any other tips that you like to put here at the end?
No, not really. I think, again, if we can share some of these resources, I think that would be helpful. At the end of the day, I feel like the most important thing is just taking into consideration who your workforce is, what they need as people, and then being responsive to that. That's going to be the best thing. And I think that even though we've done a lot as far as generations and a lot as far as a lot of research when it comes to the different age groups and what that means and what they've experienced growing up and those types of things, I would also say be very careful in generalizing any specific generation, because everyone still operates in a little different way from other people. And so if you expect a millennial to be like a millennial, and then they're the folks that are operating more like a traditionalist and want to have that face-to-face communication with you when you're out there, chatting online, sup? They may not appreciate that. So again, I think it's still just to get to know the individual is still equally as important. But I think these are great tips. And I think that knowing your audience is really important.
Thank you so much. And I know you work and you're the founder of HRX. That's a boutique service company that supports in different HR challenges. Can you tell us a little bit more about the main services you offer?
Absolutely. So you said it perfectly, Bettina. Thank you very much. We are a boutique HR consulting company. Really, what that means is that we work alongside as a partner to the team of the company who is representing the employees. And so there's always going to be someone or a group of people who are responsible for helping employees understand how to work for their company, helping employees to understand what they can do to access benefits in the organization. And when something impactful happens to that person and the employee, they're the people that employee would go to. Generally, we refer to them as HR people or people. It just depends on your organization. We work with those folks because usually it is a small department, maybe even just a department of one, and that is a very lonely space. It's very hard to work with people and all the things that happen to them in their lives and be alone in the organization. Our organization is an extension of that group of people in a company, and we help support them, make sure they've got the right tools, the right resources, and a team behind them to help make sure that they're doing everything right for their company. And that's how we operate.
Thank you so much. I really admire your work, and I think you're doing something amazing for all the companies you work. I know you work here in the United States and Canada, but I heard you're also open-minded to work with international companies that want to establish themselves here in the United States. So thank you for sharing your insights on different generations, and I hope to have you back sometime talking about other topics.
Oh, thank you so much. I enjoyed it very much, and I appreciate you having me as a guest. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Wisdom Woman Podcast. To hear past and future episodes, please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast channel. We appreciate your reviews. To give us suggestions for future show topics, please write to us at podcast@witty.tech. If you're interested in having me as your trusted advisor, schedule a strategic coaching session on my website, www.witty.tech.